I understand that there are communities that fear public safety law enforcement, but then there's also bad apples in every industry. And I think those bad apples, bad actors are the ones that made the entire industry look like they were bad overall. I believe that the community needs to come together with law enforcement and try to figure this out, because you're right, crime is on the rise everywhere. One of the things that I was hoping to do with Sheriff Jim Cooper was put in a facility, a training facility for law enforcement, public safety, including school districts as well, because right now we don't have one here in the Sacramento region.
Hello and welcome again to Sacktown Talks. Today, we're glad to be joined by Stephanie Nguyen, Assemblyman from the Elk Grove area. Stephanie, how's it going? Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me here.
I know, it's great to finally have you in here.
I know.
You had seen you all over the place in election time, representing Sacramento South area. How's it been getting adjusted to the Capitol and, assuming your first year?
Yeah, good. I love the part that you said seeing you all over the place, right? Because you always wonder if you're all over the place and you wonder if people actually even notice that you're everywhere or not.
Right.
It's been good. It's definitely one of those where you're bouncing from one thing to another, trying to find your rhythm, trying to figure out who everybody is in this building, outside of the building. It just comes at you all at once, right? And you probably meet 1,000 people a week, and then you forget what you had for breakfast this morning and whatnot. And so just coming in and meeting everybody, I think what's really good is everybody understands that it's a lot coming at one time, and they all know you're meeting a gazillion and one people, so they don't fault you for not remembering their name.
Yeah, that's what I always tell my clients, just think those 15, 20, 30-minute meetings you have with that member, she has 10 or 20 a day. So a week or two later, they're not going to remember. So that's why you always have to be in front of them, kind of reminding them.
Totally. And I feel so bad because I'll have a meeting with somebody and I'll see them again and I can't remember their name and I got to go back to the calendar and whatnot. But I just gave up. I said, there's just no way. It's going to take some time to remember everybody and get to know everybody.
So I don't know. This kind of seemed like this was one of the most contested Sacramento elections we've had in a while with, Ashby and Dave Jones and you and Eric Guerra kind of, going head to head here. And, as I said, there's a lot of, back and forth going around. And so it's good to see you. But kind of tell us about the election, kind of how was that election time and kind of the work put in and, sitting here today as the victor. What do you attribute to?
It was brutal. I will say it was one of those where I woke up every morning thinking this is going to be another day. And I felt like I had 10 hills to climb, 10 mountains to climb after the hills. Councilmember Eric Guerra is a friend.
Right.
I've worked with him prior to him being a council member. It was Councilmember Kevin McCarty. And when Councilmember Eric Guerra came in, my organization was headquarters right in his district. So we had worked together a lot. We did food distributions together. We did vaccines together. Everything that my organization did, I included him. So it broke my heart when I got the phone call that he was going to run for a seat that I had my eyes on, that I had wanted to get his support in this seat. And it was a little awkward at first because we had worked together for so long. But I was committed to it. I wanted this seat. I felt like being an elected in the city of Elk Grove, doing the work directly in the community is exactly what we needed in the Capitol. Somebody who not only has worked on local politics, but also did the work alongside of the people. I knew nothing about the Capitol. I knew nothing about what third house was. I was thinking, is there another house other than the Capitol House? I had no idea. And I had no idea how hard it was going to be. I knew it was going to be tough. I just didn't know how ugly it was going to get. And I was hoping that it wouldn't get that way since we had both worked together for so long and worked together so well. And it did get ugly, but I had to wake up every morning and just keep at it and ignore all of the noise behind me. To be honest, I didn't think I was going to win. I tell everybody that I did not think I was going to win. That night, I prepared for my speech to thank everybody and that we did our best. I did not prepare a victory speech in any way.
Wow.
And when the first drop happened and we were way ahead, I thought there was a technical error and they made the mistake and the numbers should be reversed.
Right.
And I, for the longest time, thought they're going to send us an email or whatnot and say, oh, we made a mistake, right? Because it was just such a nasty race. So many things that were said was not true. So many things that were said, but that's part of campaign, right? Everybody said, hey, you did local, now it's the big stuff and it's going to get ugly and you just have to get used to it. So it feels really good to be here because all of that time, all the hard work, I had a path, and the path for me was I couldn't get third house. I couldn't get a lot of the folks that Councilmember Eric Guerra had because he had been in the building and he had already developed those relationships, which I don't fault the folks that supported him because I get it. He had that relationship with these folks for years and I'm just now coming in. But my way to victory was working with folks that never voted, that were eligible to vote, and knew nothing about politics because those folks all hung out with a bigger group of folks that were also the same way. And so if you go back and you look at photos, videos, every night, we had just regular community members there working every night, coming out every weekend to knock on doors, and them going back to their own group and letting their groups know as well too. I felt like those were the voters that we were all missing out on that really never got involved. And it was for the first time ever they were getting involved, and they were my ambassadors out there.
It's interesting. We were talking, before the show about how, you're Sacramento's first, female API candidate. You're also the first Vietnamese Democratic legislature. And that's kind of interesting about the API community, right? They're not necessarily partisan, right?
That's right.
They just like voting for, who they like. So how big was the API community and kind of in your victory and getting, I guess, people who normally didn't vote in that community to vote for you or just to get involved at all?
It was one of those things where we were letting them know we've never here in the Sacramento region had a woman represent us. We've had Dr. Pan, we've never had a woman, right? And so getting all these mothers, all these ladies, all these little girls, right, to get involved saying, we've never had one. This is exciting times for us. We absolutely need to make sure that we get involved and show them that we absolutely can have a woman that is there. You mentioned Democrat, right, being the first Vietnamese Democrat. And in our Vietnamese community, it's a split. There are a lot of Democrats that are Vietnamese, but there are even more Vietnamese Republicans. And a lot of that has to go with just what happened during the war, during the fall of Saigon, what's happening right now in Vietnam. And it was hard for me because I had a lot of folks say that, no, she's a Democrat. And even though she's Vietnamese, I'm not voting for her. Right. And my response was, well, you either vote for this Democrat or you vote for the other Democrat. right. And so it made them think about it for a second. But I think it's the whole package. It's not just the fact that I'm a Democrat, that I'm Vietnamese, but the fact that my history of growing up in a low-income family background, public assistance, real poor, and then getting here, running a nonprofit organization that helps community members that came here with absolutely nothing. So I always take it back to, well, you came here, and when you got here, you relied on all of these public assistance services. And now that you've made it, it's time for you to give back to the community. I run that organization that has helped many folks kind of get that footstep through the door and get their lives going. And I think that regulates, that really does make people think twice, right? Because I'm not your typical politician. I'm not your typical elected official. I can prove to you the things that I've done in the community. I don't just say it, I've done it, and you could see it from videos to show that I showed up for work, doing the work, not just sitting behind a desk.
It's interesting. A lot of people probably don't know that Sacramento has a large Vietnamese population that came over in the 70s from the Vietnam War. Can you kind of tell us about your kind of upbringing and your parents and kind of how you grew up in Sacramento?
Yes. So my family came here during the fall of Saigon, but My parents escaped the Vietnam War by boat and were at sea for a few months, and finally were accepted in Australia, actually.
Wow.
And from Australia, they were sponsored by a Catholic family in Louisiana. So I was actually born in Louisiana. And from Louisiana, my dad had worked as a welder, but times were tough there. Louisiana wasn't as supportive and didn't have anything to back him up once he lost his job. And we heard California was where it was, especially Sacramento, was where they were more welcoming of refugees and that there were opportunities there. So my parents took us all over to Sacramento, and we've been here since then. I grew up in South Sacramento, right in the Little Saigon district. My parents barely spoke any English. And so like many of the Vietnamese refugee families or immigrants, we relied on public assistance. And so, I tell the story of as a third grader, I'm sitting there translating documents or interpreting for my parents, as many other, immigrant families do. And that gave me the experience of, this is real tough. Like as a third grader, I can't imagine my kids right now translating documents or information or a doctor's appointment, for me as it is now. But having 6 kids in the family, my parents, I'm, one of 6, there's just no way they were able to find a job that can really get us to the point where we would all graduate from college with cars or live in nice houses and have everything we wanted. And though I grew up poor, I never knew I was poor, right? It wasn't until you get older and you see what everybody else has, and then you realize, damn, I was poor. But you never knew it, right? You never knew, because you never knew what the other side had. Politics wasn't something in my family at all. I knew nothing about Republicans, Democrats. I knew nothing about voting. I just knew that my family struggled, and I wanted to, once I graduated from college, do something to give back to the community. So I started out just going to Loaves and Fishes and feeding the unhoused. And then from there, got more involved in the community, then met some folks that were elected officials and got involved in the community in that way. But I come from a very traditional Vietnamese Catholic family background. So I have a really unique situation where my parents are devout Catholics. My uncle is a priest, right?
Really?
And
Wow.
I'm a Catholic. Yes, my dad's younger brother is a priest, and I'm a Catholic.
In Sacramento?
Not in
Okay.
Sacramento, not in Sacramento, in Louisiana.
Okay.
But yet I'm all about women's rights. I'm all about women having to choose what is best for them.
Right.
I'm an advocate for that. And I think it's one of those where my parents have to accept the fact that, times have changed these days, and they have their beliefs and I have my beliefs. And I felt like the Catholic faith really helped me a lot in my upbringing and how I view things. But also as I got older, I also wanted to have my own views and my own decisions and my own choices as well too. So I have a really unique perspective. And then to just muddy the water a little bit more, I'm married to a cop, right? And so you would think that I've got these views, but then I'm married to a cop who, also came from Vietnam, who actually was born in Vietnam and came over here as immigrants that were sponsored. And who would have thought that this immigrant little boy who came over here at the age of 12 would become a cop for the Elk Grove Police Department.
Elk Grove PD, okay.
Yes. Yeah. So I feel like I have a really unique perspective on everything. Running a nonprofit was like running a business. Everything that happened at the Capitol, I used to hate the beginning of the year because all the labor laws changed, everything changed.
Right.
I have to pull everything up and change everything. Running a nonprofit, I have to follow all the labor laws, all of the regulations, everything as well too.
Right.
And so I had that unique perspective of everything all across.
Yeah. So, we talked earlier, so you went to McClatchy for high school. Where'd you go to college?
Sac State.
So Sac State, so
Yep.
local. And so then how did you
Local.
end up living in Elk Grove?
As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a very traditional Vietnamese family. And the only way you were able to move out, there was no such thing as moving out in an apartment, right? As the oldest daughter in my family, my dad is the oldest in his family. He's the oldest son, and I'm the oldest daughter. So that means you almost play the role of mom, right?
Right.
And it was not an option for me to move out and get an apartment like many of my high school friends who graduated and moved out at the time. That's kind of what it was. The only way you moved out was if you went to college that was a long distance and was far away and you had to get to the dorms or whatnot. My parents were really, really strict, like really strict,
Right.
really, really strict. So I said, all right, I'm going to get out of college. I'm going to go to work and I'm just going to buy a house. So I bought my first house at the age of 22, made sure that
Nice.
I told them that, okay, I bought a house. And that was the only way you could move out as the oldest girl in the family. So looking at where to buy a house, where to start, Elk Grove was up and coming. Elk Grove was new. Elk Grove was one of those areas that wasn't too far away from where my parents lived. And so bought my first house in Elk Grove.
Yeah,
and it's been there since then.
Yeah. So I grew up in Elk Grove, and I remember when there was like not that many people.
Yeah.
And I remember going away for college and coming back, and all of a sudden there's like 200,000 people in Elk Grove.
Yes.
And it was also the first place I bought a home when I moved to Sacramento.
All right.
Because it was affordable and you could get a nice
That's
new
right.
house, and it wasn't too far from downtown compared
right.
to like Roseville or some of these other areas.
Yes.
But the world's kind of changed now. Like Elk Grove, it's $1 million. The home I bought for $400,000 is now worth over $1 million, which is crazy to know. Kind of, we're dealing with this housing crunch, and places like Elk Grove used to be a solution for housing because we had tons of space and you could just build more. Kind of your experience, kind of working on the city council, kind of going over these things, kind of. What are some of the things you're noticing now that you're up here, how to solve housing and kind of create more affordable living in places like Elk Grove and in your district?
Yeah, it is really difficult. And I will say that there is no one size fits all. So what may work in Sacramento, what may work in Citrus Heights, what may work in Elk Grove is not going to be the same thing that works for any other city, right? The beauty behind us living here in California is that we're made up of all these districts and we all get to represent and fight for our districts. I would say that you're right. Like Elk Grove has grown tremendously, and District 4, which was the district which I was the council member for and represented, was the area which had the most amount of growth. And I will say that when we were going through all these affordable housing that was going up, everybody was saying, well, District 4 is the newest one, so put it there. And I always thought that's unfair. Not to say that I didn't want them in my district, because I came from that, right? I came from that. And this perception of folks that live in low-income housing, affordable housing, are gang members, sell drugs, or, I'm one of those.
Right.
And I definitely am not in a gang or didn't sell drugs or wasn't doing any of that. But the fact that what was happening was a lot of it was going in my district, I always said, we need to make sure that we spread it out all over, not just in one area, because what happens is that it's going to become an area where it's known to just have this cluster, right, of community. And not only that, I felt like we need to start looking at different models. So just because we are talking about affordable housing doesn't mean that you're low income. You're talking about teachers. You're talking about people that work in hospitals. You're talking about, there are a lot of folks that qualify that you would not know. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of folks that work in the Capitol that probably qualify as well too, right? And so I think it's thinking of other opportunities and other ways to ensure that people qualify. That's what we are missing, is that we're saying folks that are low income are the ones that qualify, but they are seen as just a certain type, a certain folks that have certain jobs or with kids or whatnot, but they could be young folks as well too. We all need to do our job. We all need to do our part. I just think if we don't start taking care of the folks that truly do qualify and want to move out and want to be a part of a certain city, then we're not helping anybody out, right? Yeah. Once upon a time, you graduate from high school, you move into an apartment. You move into an apartment and then you build your credit and you buy a house. That's not happening anymore. What we're seeing are folks are moving into these low-income housing complexes and they stay there forever. There's nothing helping them to get them out of there into home ownership or renting of a house, right? Is there a shortage of housing overall? Absolutely there is. But I think the root cause is also work, right? So I come from a nonprofit organization that did workforce development, and we're getting people in jobs, but we're getting them jobs where it's not affording them to be able to pay for rent, food, utilities, car, all of that. And so we got to go back and look at what are we truly doing to help them get into housing. I think a lot of it has to do with, we're seeing a lot of the unhoused with some mental struggles as well too, right? And so I think there's an issue there that we also need to address. But whoever figures out how to put this all together is going to be a gazillionaire, if that's even a word.
Right. You have, I guess, an interesting perspective because, you grew up here. This was a big issue in the campaign. I remember homelessness. Sacramento, we see it everywhere. We see the tents everywhere. It's bad. You don't see it in Elk Grove. You don't see it in some of these other communities. Right. I was down in Orange County. I drove all the way around Orange County. I didn't see anybody with a tent anywhere. It's kind of interesting. And, having your husband being a police officer, right. I'm sure dealing with a lot of these things in the community as well.
Yes.
Kind of what are you seeing on homelessness and kind of what do you think some of the solutions are to kind of help Sacramento and your district kind of solve some of these homelessness issues?
So what I love so much about the city of Elk Grove is that we see it ahead of time and we don't wait until it gets out of control and then address it. I'll give you a great example. When Assemblymember, our now Sheriff Jim Cooper, was the Assemblymember, I'd worked with him on securing $5 million to the city of Elk Grove to put in some homeless navigators. That was before it blew all out of proportion everywhere else. So we saw that being an issue already and predicted that. Yeah. And so he got us the money to be able to hire officers and community organizations in place to be able to address that and to make sure that there was resources and services out there. The other thing I'd say is that coming from the nonprofit perspective of knowing what types of programs and resources are available when the pandemic happened and folks weren't able to pay for their rent in their homes, we came up with the rental assistance in the city of Elk Grove. I want to say we were the first one, the first city to be able to set aside $100,000 and said, okay, any resident that you could rent, you could be a homeowner. If you are having difficulties paying for your mortgage or your rent because of the pandemic, we gave them money so that they can pay and stay in the house. For the landlords that were saying that this is not fair, that they can stay in the house and not pay for their rent, but yet I still have to pay the mortgage. Right. This gave them relief as well too, right? And so we were the first one to do that. And then you saw other cities start to do that as well too. So I believe what we did was we saw it ahead of time and we start to address it before it got out of control. Right. So often, and it's the human in us, right? Mm-hmm. Like we think it's going to get fixed on its own. You just see it and you don't do anything about it. And it gets out of control. When it's out of control, then it's even going to cost a lot more to fix. Right. I'll give you a really good example. Since you mentioned my husband being on the Elk Grove Police Department, when I worked in South Sacramento in the Little Saigon district, you would see somebody, most of the time, it's an unhoused person sleeping on the sidewalk or whatnot and just laying there. And I would drive by and that person would still be there for hours. Nobody called it in. Right. But in Elk Grove, the minute somebody is laying there, you get a gazillion phone calls calling in saying somebody's laying there. Or he would say these kids would be walking home from school and they would be horsing around, pushing each other or whatnot. And they would get the phone call saying there's a fight happening in front of the schools there. Right. And it wasn't. It was just kids messing around. But you wouldn't get that in certain neighborhoods in my district. Right. And it's because they've seen it and they don't think anything bad of it, so they don't call it in. Right. But Elk Grove, they call in everything. The residents in Elk Grove, anything and everything. Somebody's got their grass not cut. You're a resident. Their grass isn't cut and it's over 12 inches, they'll call it in. Right.
No, yeah, I remember as a kid too. The Elk Grove PD was always quick to respond.
Oh, yes. Yeah, code enforcement is in full force out there. They are busy because so many people call things in.
Yeah. I guess, interesting parlay into the next topic, crime, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people are complaining about crime, especially petty theft, low-level things like that. Kind of see an explosion of that. And you're just seeing apathy from the DA's office and things like that. Kind of what are some things you're working on? I know Jim Cooper, before you was, someone who believed in the system and, having your husband as experience as well. Kind of where do you see him on the crime side and some of the solutions?
Yeah, I am able to say that I understand that there are communities that fear public safety law enforcement, but then there's also bad apples in every industry, right? And I think those bad apples, bad actors are the ones that made the entire industry look like they were bad overall. And I'd say that not every single person in law enforcement is bad, but it's hard to change that. Years, decades, centuries of the way things were. I believe that the community needs to come together with law enforcement and try to figure this out, because you're right, crime is on the rise everywhere. We hear about it, we read about it. What's worse is we're seeing shootings happening in schools these days. Who would have thought that was going to happen? One of the things that I was hoping to do with Sheriff Jim Cooper was put in a training facility for law enforcement, public safety, including school districts as well, because right now we don't have one here in the Sacramento region. And while it's here in the Sacramento region, it wouldn't be limited to just Sacramento. It would be open for all public safety up and down California, because we know this is the capital. This is where they all come to.
Right.
And it would be an opportunity for them to be able to get trained, also go through scenarios in a situation where there was an active shooter that's happening in the schools. We don't have that right now. There isn't that training. There isn't a facility. There isn't a location where that can happen. And that's something that we need to have a conversation about, because we don't have that conversation right now. I have 2 small kids in schools, and when I saw what was happening up and down, what was happening out there right now in other states, I just think it's just a matter of time before it happens here in California.
Right.
But we need to be ready for that. We need to be prepared. And it's not just preparing public safety, but it's preparing our teachers as well. It's difficult because there's so many people that see things different about Prop 47, 57, and what is the answer to that, right? Because everybody has an idea.
They're not easy fixes.
It isn't an easy
props,
fix.
Yeah.
It isn't an easy fix. And I think we have to have that conversation of how do we all come to the table and compromise and think about what needs to get done. Do I have an answer? I don't have an answer. My answer is that we all just need to come to the table and try to figure this out, because if we don't, it's only going to get worse. More babies are going to die. We're going to see more shootings happen. We're going to see more shootings in schools. Mm-hmm. We're going to see, all of that escalate. And so I think we do have to eventually all come to the table and figure out what's the fix. How do we all work together?
Right. You're a product of the public education system.
Yes.
Came up through it, and you just said you had 2 young kids probably in the Elk Grove School District there.
Yes.
Kind of what are some of your thoughts on the education system, and what are you looking to do to kind of make it better?
Yeah, we are very fortunate that we live in the city where the education is, Elk Grove Unified School District has one of the best education systems, I think, right?
Yeah.
And
so do I. My sister's a teacher down there.
There you go. Great. And my kids have excelled, being a part of the Elk Grove Unified School District. I've also been a part of Sacramento Unified School District. I've also been a part of seeing family members who have their kids be a part of other school districts that are not fortunate enough to be a part of what my kids are a part of.
Right.
And so I think there are certain cities in certain areas where they're thriving and they're doing well, and more needs to be done to help those that are not, because it's not fair for certain neighborhoods or certain school districts to have, the kids are there to learn, but we shouldn't fault them for what zip code they live in or where they live. The education, if it's public education, it needs to be the same for all school districts. But it's difficult because teachers nowadays, they're not seen as heroes, right? Your teachers are the ones that are preparing all of us for the future, and we don't give them enough credit for what they do every day. I love Mondays because that's when my kids go back to school. I tell the teachers that, thank the Lord it's Monday tomorrow because you guys are going back to school again, because those are the times where they're in school all day. They come home, they're tired. Weekends, I get them all day. I don't know how teachers do it. And I feel like I've got really good kids, but these teachers really do put their heart and soul into this. And we're seeing a shortage in teachers because nobody wants to do the job anymore, right? I feel like they're not being appreciated enough, and they're probably not being compensated the way they should be as well, too. And so I think more needs to be done for our school districts. I think we need to figure out a system where we can support them, give them more funding to be able to do things for our kids. You're seeing certain districts where they have programs, right, where kids can be a part of, band, sports, and then you're seeing school districts in my districts that have gotten those taken away, right? And so it's unfair for the kids because, again, they didn't choose to live in this zip code, right? And so there's got to be options But, I think parents need options, kids need options, especially when we saw COVID and how some kids thrived on virtual learning and others didn't. And then once we went back to non-virtual, we saw some kids really just struggle coming back, and they thrived during the virtual learning. And I think we just need to figure out, times have changed now. It's no more that you got to go to school. This is the school you go to. I think we're seeing a lot of options, and I think options are not a bad thing.
Yeah. The Stockton Boulevard you grew up in is not the Stockton Boulevard of today. It's, wildly changed, even from 5 years ago. It's like the place to be now. And even the South area, your whole district has probably, some of the best restaurants and things like that in Sacramento. Kind of, what are some of your favorite restaurants in your district? And, what should we know about? Where should we go if we want some good Vietnamese food or something else to know in your district?
Yeah, I would say you're right. Stockton Boulevard continues to change. Once upon a time, it was known for prostitution, right?
Yeah.
And you would see it. And while you see some of that now, what you will see, though, is many of the immigrant families that came here and stayed in Stockton Boulevard area, the Little Saigon area, also decided to open up restaurants, open up shops, and invested in Stockton Boulevard, which is why it's now called Little Saigon. Most of those restaurants in the area are your authentic Vietnamese food, right? So every single restaurant specializes in different things, like their pho, their bún bò Huế, bún riêu, or their nam nương, which is like the spring rolls. And I would say if you asked me to pick one favorite restaurant, I couldn't tell you, because they all specialize in separate dishes,
politician,
right?
Huh?
No, and it's true, right? This isn't like they all sell different things, but they all are known for their one dish. And everybody in the Vietnamese community knows that, right? Like everybody in the community knows if you want bún bò Huế, you go to Cô Đô, everybody will tell you that. They make the best, and they're known for that. And when you go in there, that's the one thing everybody gets is that. Or nam nương, which is the spring rolls.
Right.
There's a restaurant that does that, and everybody goes there just for that.
Right.
Or Duc Hương, the Vietnamese sandwiches, right? Or Hương Lan. So they all specialize in something different.
No, it's amazing. That little shopping center they have there. It's just like every little shop is just like, going
thriving.
to Vietnam itself.
Yes. Stockton Boulevard literally is thriving. And they did it, I want to say they did it all on their own. There was no assistance, from the city or the county. Most of these little small restaurants really felt like, one, they didn't have the ability to hire somebody to submit the applications or go through the process. I mean, they did the permitting and everything, but at the end of the day, a lot of businesses applied for grants or assistance. Most of these are ran by immigrants who barely speak English.
Right.
They rely on their kids to go to school, then come home and come in and help out in the restaurants. Mom and dad, brothers, sisters, aunts, and uncles all work there. And they just did what they can to get it up and going.
No, it's something. Well, I know you're busy today. You got a lot of things to go to, so we'll let you run. But thank you so much for stopping by and, giving us all something to know about you a little bit.
No, thank you for this opportunity.
All right, great. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks.